Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Pranzata Podcast. This is your host, Andrea Pranzatelli. This is episode number 159 on the Pranzata Podcast here on YouTube. We have a guest today. This is Tara Grace. Tara is the founder of a podcast called Burn the Stigma Podcast, which I discovered on Spotify, and it's also on YouTube. On her podcast, she challenges outdated recovery methods and more. And we're going to talk about all that on the podcast. So before we get started, I have a list of questions for her today, just to explain why I brought you on here to you and the listeners. So I recently, I want to say about 2 months ago now, just left the 12-step program. And I've been podcasting for a few years now. And I've been debating whether or not it's something I want to talk about publicly. And I've binge watched your episode, so I know you've already thought about this yourself. But when I was trying to decide that, there was a part of me that was like, it might be irresponsible if I talk about it, because what if somebody is benefiting from the program and I'm going to harm them in some kind of way by convincing them to leave the program? But after binge watching some of your episodes on Spotify, I feel okay to talk about it. You've convinced me that this is an okay thing to talk about, and we should be talking about this. So my first question for you, how long were you in the 12-step recovery program before you realized you wanted to leave?
So I was in back and forth in it for like over 10 years. And when I finally left, I had been away from it. It was basically I had used and then I was done using again. Like I'm talking about I was a revolving door, like in and out of detox, treatment, sober living, 30, 60, 120 days, then go back out and then repeat the whole process like over and over and over again. Right. And so and all of those places were 12-step based places. So I'm getting all of the information about like this is the way that it has to be. So when I just gave up on recovery, basically. I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just gonna, that clearly isn't working for me. So I stopped going, but it was like a good 10 years of really giving it my all and trying to make it work.
Okay. Was there a catalyst moment that you were like, I've got to get out of here? And if so, what was that? Or was it more of a slow drip, little things started eating away at you that made you inevitably leave over time?
So by the end, it was like in the beginning, I really didn't want to be sober. Like it's just my family was like breathing down my neck. And it was like I was trying to do it for them just to make my life less complicated. And then it got to a point where I really did want to stop. And then it was like I'm doing all the suggestions. I was like so good at trying to fake it until I made it. Like I was doing all of the things. And I was like, this just isn't working. But I will be honest with you, even when I gave up on it and I said I'm not going back, I would still recommend to everybody. Like I thought it was a me problem, but it took me years after I left to realize that no, it's a program problem. Right. So even when I left, I still thought like I can't do this, but that works for most people. And if there's something fundamentally wrong with me that I can't get it, but it should work for everybody else.
Right. And like to my point, what I was saying earlier before, that was my thought exactly. When I left, I was like, maybe it's just my personality that's not fit for this. And I really shouldn't speak out loud about this because it would be selfish of me. But like I said, after listening to your podcast, and not just you, but the guests you brought on and a lot of those conversations, I'm like, oh, it's not just me. There's a lot of people out there sitting in these meetings and having thoughts in their head like, wait a second, should I challenge this? Should I challenge that? But they kind of stay. So I think it's important for all these voices to be speaking out about this. So for my next question, basically, I wrote a list of some of my major criticisms of the program. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you mine, and I want you to let me know if you oh yeah, I have experience with this as well. And then later I'm gonna ask if I missed anything that you're like, I want to touch on this. So the first thing I wrote here was, in the program, I felt there was a lack of individualized thinking. There is a motivation to keep everybody thinking along the same lines, like group thinking. Do you agree with that? What are some of your experiences with that, if you agree with that?
I mean, absolutely. And there's a phrase, they call it terminally unique. Like, if you do
Yeah.
think differently, then you're going to die because we are all the same. Like, the quote unquote addict and quote unquote alcoholic, and I hate using those
Hmm.
words, but that's their language. There
Hmm.
is a definition. And if you meet this criteria, this is you. This is how your brain thinks. Like, there's an automatic checklist of everything that they think that you are, and you're supposed to know that you are. So 100%, there is no individuality. You are the quote unquote addict or alcoholic, and that is that one identity, that one common thing that we all share. And then it happens to be your entire personality. Everything about you is that thing when you belong to
Hmm.
that program.
Yeah, one of the things that sticks in my mind, one of the quotes they said was, "Your best thinking got you here." Do you have they said that in your meetings as well?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
super common. That's part of that. You can't trust yourself because your
Yeah.
best decisions got you here. Like, it's all to break you down and make you think that you have to go along with all of these suggestions because your life is unmanageable when you are in your self-will. You
Yeah.
can't be living there. You need to take all the suggestions of this program because you don't know how to live life.
Which is, in my opinion, is very, I can see at first glance how it might seem useful because, these people we have a drug addiction of some kind, because I know the 12-step program branches out to all kinds of addictions, not just drugs or alcohol. But at first glance, that would seem useful. But in my opinion, it's counterproductive for somebody who struggles with addiction because, from my personal experience, I feel like not trusting my own intuition is what pulls me towards addiction, because it's like I need some type of framework, some type of structure, something to fix me. I don't have the answers. And I find that learning to trust my own intuition was a huge thing for me in order to live a healthy lifestyle. So I don't know if you can relate to that at all.
No, I mean, absolutely, because it's one of those things. It's if you can't trust yourself, then who the
Yeah.
hell can you trust? If you can't
Yeah.
trust your own brain and you literally get conditioned to believe that you can't trust, like I remember there was another saying in one of my groups, I didn't hear it a lot, but one group, they would always say first thought wrong. Like, the first thought that comes to your mind is always going to be wrong because that's how effed up your brain is and your thoughts are. That is
Yeah.
not like that's not empowering. Like, we need to like go in there and you want to be built up, but it's all about breaking you down
Yeah.
to just comply to what they say and what they do, because but first they have to convince you that you can't do this, like you are screwed basically.
Yeah. And you never know what someone's like childhood trauma background is. For example, there
Mhm.
might be somebody who uses substances of, whatever addiction, because they might have come from a family that made them doubt their own intuition. So it's really complex. Like, people get in unhealthy situations for all kinds of reasons. But for me personally, I can speak for myself, and it sounds like you, and I'm sure many people as well, is that doubting my intuition is a dangerous thing for me, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
So, okay, moving on. Now, okay, I did want to ask you about this because I wasn't sure if this was something that, because the 12-step meeting that I went to it was kind of a big meeting. It was a virtual meeting. It had over 100 people in it. And so I wasn't sure if that was just the culture of my meeting or if this was something that they talked about in other meetings as well. But in my meeting, they would often say, if you follow the 12-step program, blessings are coming your way. Is that something that they would say in your meetings as well? So I found this to be very destructive for me particularly. And I know it's not just for me. Like I said, I want to speak out about this stuff because I was talking, my boyfriend and I were going for a drive the other day, and he was telling me, he said, I have some friends in recovery that I found that after they were completed with the 12-step program, they weren't really set up for real life. And to relate that back to the point I'm making about the blessings are coming, I did the 12 steps. I did them to a T. I was like the golden star student for my sponsor. She loved me. After I was done with the 12-step program, my life was in shambles, and not related to any addiction reasons, because I just had an unexpected health issue that was, and it led to serious financial consequences. It led to chronic pain. So for me, I was like, well, what the hell? I was told that if, like, everybody in my meeting was like, I'm living my dream career. I have my dream husband. You don't understand. If you follow the 12 steps, the higher power will take care of you and the blessings are coming. And I'm like, where the fuck are my blessings? Because I was in one of the lowest places. And I actually think it's not, I don't know. I'm like arguing with myself in my head. I'm like, maybe it's good to have a higher power of some kind to get you through hard times. But the idea that if you follow the rules, the blessings are coming can be destructive. I don't know if you have anything to say about that or have any experiences with that as well.
Well, it's that whole idea. They say don't quit before the miracle happens, right? So it keeps you in
Right.
there longer
Yes.
because you're like, I'm waiting for the fucking miracle to happen, like
Yeah.
and you see around you there are people who do seem to be doing the thing, like they have what you want, right? That's what they always
Yeah.
say, like find people that have what you want and
What
do
you
what they
want.
do
Right.
and all that stuff. And it's like I'm doing it, and even though I'm not feeling it, I'm literally told to fake it, so I'm just gonna keep on faking it with my little car full of sponsees, smoking our
Yeah.
cigarettes on our way to the meeting. And like I dropped these, I used to call them my spiritual bombs in the meeting because I could talk the talk, the big book talk, and talk this, do the
Yeah.
shares, and then
Yeah.
get the recognition at the, oh, that was a good share. Like that was what I was living for at that moment because I had nothing else, and
Yeah.
it was just like waiting, being like, eventually, I've got to feel something, I've got to feel better. But I wasn't feeling better because my issues weren't my substance use disorder. My issue wasn't my, shooting heroin. Like, yes, that became the problem, right? But that's
Right.
not what my actual issue is. But the whole program is just focused on really your use. They say it's about your internal stuff, but it all comes down to your identity of the quote unquote addict or alcoholic, and it's,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, the whole don't quit before the miracle happens is then like what you were saying with the blessings, your blessings are coming. I think it just strings you along because you're like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Eventually it's going to come for me. Everyone's telling me it's coming. I'm going to keep on doing what I'm supposed to do because this is, I mean, you think that's all you got. Like, what are your
Yeah.
alternatives? Jails, institutions, and death, like all that whole spiel. So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really fucked up.
And it's really hard because thankfully I was able to stay on a steady path after that rough period of my life. And I'm still kind of coming out of that. I had surgery a couple months ago to deal with some of the stuff I was going through, and I'm finally getting on the better end of that.
Good.
But it was really hard. And I could see if I was in a mentally, I was in an okay place at this time, but I could see that if I had been in a more vulnerable state of mind during all this, that how I could have fallen backwards, and I would have been like, fuck it, I could have been like, fuck it. Well, higher power didn't take care of me. So obviously this isn't working. So some of the best advice that I've gotten that has actually helped me push through times like that is that the only thing that's really certain in life is that suffering is going to happen. So I think in my opinion, that's much more useful advice to deal with the world than be a good girl and the blessings will come, like Santa will come with your presents if you're a nice little girl. Like, I think just saying the truth that like, hey, hard times are coming is a lot more useful, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So another point I brought up was that I think sponsors can actually, some of them or many of them, can do more harm than good. Do you have any experience with that? Whether it be yourself, did you feel irresponsible being a sponsor, or did you have a sponsor that you felt was unhealthy for you? If you can share any insight or stories about that.
I mean, for me, what always sticks out is I didn't have the opportunity to be their sponsor, but there was a couple of times, there were women that would come up to me and they would ask me to sponsor them, but they would tell me, we would have a little conversation. They would tell me they're on Suboxone or methadone, and I would say, well, when you're serious, because I meant like get off your medication.
Yeah.
When you're serious, give me a call. Here's my number. And like, that is the most reckless and irresponsible thing that I could have ever said to somebody. There are a couple of women that I sponsored who are no longer on this earth anymore that, I mean, I don't think that I'm directly responsible, but I know that I filled their head with some shit that wasn't even true, based on the program, the
Right.
principles of the program. And I know that they believed it just as hard as I believed it, and they didn't
Yeah.
make it back in. So 100%. Have I had toxic sponsors? Absolutely. I think if you've been in the rooms long enough, and by long enough, I mean, if you've asked to have a sponsor, you've probably encountered, even if it wasn't a fully toxic sponsor, just the dynamics of the relationship is toxic to begin with, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane to think that just because somebody else struggled with a substance, that they know how to guide you through anything. And I know there'll be someone who says, well, a true sponsor is just supposed to take you through the steps. Sure, that is, there's a lot of things that AA is supposed to be and do, but what actually the reality of what happens in 99% of the communities is the reality. And you can say, well, that's the fellowship, that's not the program, all of those things. But at the end of the day, it becomes people's experience. You can go tit for tat on what it is, but the whole thing together, everybody's experience. I mean, yeah, I 100% think that the sponsor-sponsee relationship has taken a lot of people's lives. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, there was so I only had one sponsee ever because I learned pretty quickly that I wanted to get out of the program. But during my time being a sponsor, I guess my thought process, I wanted to leave the program as soon as I was done with the 12 steps, precisely because of what I told you earlier, that I had gotten ill like right after finishing the 12 steps, and that made me question everything, with the blessings and everything like that. But my thought process was, well, I don't want to just like take from the program and not give back to at least one person. So I made a commitment to sponsor at least one person. So it just made me feel better. But during that time, she was going through some, and I'm not going to give too many personal details, but she was going through a lot of crises in her life. I don't know the plural of that, but crises in her life. And I felt like it was too much for me to be, she was really looking up to me for answers. And I was like, it felt irresponsible for me to be guiding her through these things that really what she should have been doing was either working with a professional therapist or working on her learning how to use her own intuition, because the stuff she was bringing to me was stuff regarding her marriage and what decisions to make about should she stay in this marriage, that type of stuff. And thinking back to when I had two sponsors and they were very strict with me, and if I was a more strict person, I could have sent her in the wrong directions, or I could have guided her in the wrong directions. You know what I mean? So, in your experience, did you have any sponsors that were overly strict with you, or do you have any stories about that?
Yeah, well, so especially in the beginning of my journey, it's like I went to a treatment center, and I went to this treatment center twice, but this particular one set me off on my 12-step journey, right? And
Yeah.
the type of after you went to the treatment center, majority of people went to sober living together
Yeah.
afterwards, right? And so this town, like they had different towns, like one was in Burlington, Vermont. This is the one that I went
Hmm.
to, but they had ones throughout Maine too. And what
Yeah.
happens is a bunch of graduates from the treatment center end up living in these towns in sober houses, then they'll move out and get apartments. So basically it's almost like a mini town of treatment, or like there's a section of the population, right? And when
Hmm.
there's more people involved and more close knit, the toxicity is so much worse, right? Because it's
Hmm.
almost like you're in competition with each other, because we all went there around the same time, and who's collecting more sponsees and who's more of a hard ass sponsee. And then it becomes like you want to get somebody who's known for being a hard ass sponsor. And I remember, going that route, wanting a more hard ass sponsor, a sponsor who's really committed and really into it and all the
Hmm.
things. And well, what comes with that? Well, super toxic shit, right? Like someone who's up
Yeah.
your butt about everything in the most unhealthy way. And like you said, you're not a professional. This person's not a professional, but yet it's very much treated like somebody that you can go to for absolutely anything. And that is
Yeah.
just so far from the truth. They're not equipped. And when your best advice is, well, pray about it, go help somebody else, go outside of yourself. Well, you're never learning to deal with anything. And
Yeah.
it's just like this cycle, right? Like you just end up praying, going doing service work, then you lay your down at night and you're like, I still have all of the same racing thoughts and shit going through my head. And I'm still so not knowing how to live life, but I'll just keep praying and helping others because this person, they don't know what the hell to tell you what to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's blanket advice for everybody. But yeah,
That's it. Later, I'm going to fast forward a little bit because later on the end of the paper, I wrote, let's talk about any potential things that you actually felt were beneficial. Because just to be fair, okay, this was a beneficial thing. I was going to ask about that if you thought that the service aspect of it was a good thing or a bad thing. Because I never pieced it together that way, that it is good to be in service of others. I'm not going to deny that. It's good to help people. It's good to help your community. But I never really thought about that in the frame of overcoming your own issues, that helping other people could be a distraction away from your own problems. I mean, maybe it's a good distraction. Maybe it's buying time till you figure the other stuff out. I don't know. But that's a really interesting perspective. And it makes me challenge like, maybe that is a criticism of the program that I thought was actually a good thing, was the service end of things, you know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, of course, helping others is great, of course, but
Yeah.
I do think that the whole pray about it and be of service does become a distraction. It also becomes a preventative for you getting the real actual help that you need, like the
Yeah.
actual, like, you don't get to the root of anything, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
you don't get to the root of anything when you believe that your problem is that you have a spiritual malady. You're not
Right.
going to get to the root of anything when that is your thought belief. But the whole service work, I think it's one of those things you almost feel bad, or I used to, I don't anymore, but you almost feel bad about talking because it's like, oh, it's helping others. Like, how is that a bad thing? And
Yeah.
well, the act of helping others isn't a bad thing, but when that becomes your, you know, your mental health help, you're not helping yourself, right? You're literally not doing anything to help yourself. You're helping somebody else instead of helping yourself, which, yes, be selfless, great. But I mean, it's also how people end up taking their own lives because they don't know how to
Right.
deal with life. So, you know,
It reminds me of like people who are in codependent relationships. They're almost addicted to helping other people. So I've heard people say that in the program, that they become addicted to the program. They become addicted to helping other people, you know? So the addiction, I suppose, just takes a new form in that case.
right. And people aren't going to see that as a bad thing. Just like when you say something about the
Yeah.
program, it's like they're literally brainwashing you and they're like, well, my brain needed washing. I was a
I've heard
chronic
that before
alcohol, blah, blah,
too.
blah. So
I've
it's,
heard that before too. Yeah.
yeah, it's if you think it's a positive, then you're not going to see how, like, my personal belief, like, I used to always be a person just say, I support all pathways, which I do. I 100% support people doing what works for them. And if I believe in personal autonomy, then I believe that if you choose to work the program, that you should absolutely have the right to choose to work that program. But I still personally believe that even the people that the program helps, it is still preventing them from reaching a place in life. Like, I feel like they could be even more free than they realize.
Yeah.
I feel like it just ends up holding them back in life, even though, people will say it's a great thing because they turn it all around not using the substance. So when you make that your biggest, I don't know how to say this without sounding like, the way that we look at substance use disorder and addiction in this country, especially, we look at it as this incurable forever thing that somebody is going to have, which after doing a lot of
Mm.
my own research, I don't see it that way. I see it as a curable thing. Like, majority of people do overcome it, even though we hear the complete opposite, right? We always hear
Yeah.
that nobody makes it out. It's so rare, but but data doesn't lie. But, and I know there's different studies, all this shit. I'm always thinking of like what other people are going to say because every time I say something, people always counter it. But there's plenty of multiple studies that show most people overcome it, right? So why are we telling people when they go into treatment, look to your right, look to your left, only one of you is going to make it? Why are people walking around with a 2% tattoo because they think only 2% of IV drug users make it out? Like there's so much fake information out there about what substance use disorder and addiction is. It's mind blowing. I don't know what your question. I forget what I was talking about.
No,
I'm sorry.
I think we went on a side tangent because we were talking about the good. We were challenging like that. I thought one of the good things was the service, and you kind of convinced
Oh
me that there's
yeah.
something to look at here. But I actually did want to touch on something you just said because when I wrote my list of things I wanted to talk about, I forgot to write that down. But that's actually something that I agree with you on there. When they say that addiction is a progressive disease. They say that, I don't know if they say that in the country or if it's they just say it in the program, but they say addiction is a progressive lifelong disease. I do know I to my intuition was like I don't think this is a disease, but then I did look it up. I think I chat GBT'd it. I'm like, does the medical in the United States, does the medical industry consider addiction a disease? And they do apparently. Apparently they consider it, but my intuition or my thought process was like, how is it a disease? Like, how do you define, why is it defined as a disease? Is it because they think it's like, what is a disease? Like, do you know what that is?
You know, it's so weird. I just know like the history of it
Yeah.
was like it was actually this lady Marty Mann who was like big in AA, and she went
Yeah.
around and she was like talking about AA, but she was really influential in getting people to see it as a disease. Now you can look at it in two different ways, right? You know, looking at it once they started to see it as a disease medically, well, now insurance and people are like, it's going to get covered that way, right? Like now it's opening up doors for treatment versus when you look at it as a, you know, a moral thing, like he's just an asshole.
Yeah.
That's why he won't stop drinking. When you start look, so you can look at it that way. But I feel like all these years later, it actually has really hindered us, right? And it's really held people back because it just, instead of being like these crazy immoral people that can't get well, now we're these diseased people that can't get well. Like
Right.
it didn't really, it changed the stigma a tiny bit. And then when the more that I learn about treatment and just like how just messed up everything, basically everything that we're taught is basically a lie. Is the fact that people have had more access to treatment since then, is that a good thing? I don't know. You know, like would it
Yeah.
have been better if people could just learn the truth and learn how to, you know, I think a lot of what I became was because I was told that's what I was and who I was. Would I have
Yeah.
kept going and doing all those things if I didn't believe that's what was going to happen anyways? Who knows? I don't know. I can't answer that. But I do think the whole disease thing, because every time that I talk about it, there'll be people who have brought it to my attention that, you know, well, it is a good thing that because it helped get people more treatment. But then a couple years later, it's like I'm always deprogramming like deeper and deeper. And now it's like,
Yeah.
I don't think that getting more access to treatment, when you look at the treatment that we have available, when you look at majority of treatment is based in the disease model 12-step way, I don't think it's a good thing, especially like these young people that we're programming to believe, you know, at 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, that they have this lifelong progressive disease. No, I don't think that's a good thing. I don't, you know.
I've heard you say that on one of your podcast episodes before, and I agree with that. I, it's it was hard for me as a 37-year-old woman to be told that I have a lifelong progressive disease, which I don't think I have. But it's even worse. I think you said on one of your episodes that you should think it should be illegal to say that,
Yeah,
right?
I
Is that what you
do.
said?
Yeah.
To tell a child, like someone whose brain is still forming, they're not even 24 years old yet, they're still 17, 18, 19 years old, and you're telling them, and they're probably going to believe you, because I know when I was
Yeah.
19, my brain was like, I looked to adults for answers. You know what I mean? When I was a kid, I was like, the adults have the answers. So if somebody told me I had a disease when I was 19, I would have believed it. So imagine going your whole life when, man, people can fall into addictive patterns for all kinds of different reasons. Like I'm sure some people's brains could be a little more, I don't know. For me personally, I have a very OCD type of brain. Like I have a lot of OCD behaviors. Like when I leave the house, I will check the heat and the stove like a bunch of times, even though when I know I didn't turn, like it'll be the summer and I wouldn't even turn the heat on. And I'll be like, I got to check the heat. Yeah. And I think like I feel like those types of brains, like obsessive people can easily fall susceptible to acting impulsively, but that doesn't mean I have a disease. It's just the way my brain works. Like when I understand how my brain works, like, oh, I'm an obsessive compulsive person. I have these very strong neural pathways built. And if I build a pathway to do something, I want to keep doing it again. That doesn't mean I have a disease. That just means I need to retrain my brain pathways. I think if I was 19 and somehow my neural brain pathways went down the road, which I did actually. I was drinking a lot when I was when I was like 19, 20. I started drinking pretty heavily at a young age. If I had thought that I just had a disease then, which I didn't do the 12-step program until I was 35 is when I did it. But I think that would have been really dangerous for me, to think that. So, yeah.
Yeah. It is dangerous because it becomes your whole identity. Like when you are once you're in treatment, whether it's through the rooms or through going to rehab, that becomes your whole personality. Everything that you do becomes based around the fact that you've had a problematic use with substances. Yeah. Everything the way that everybody treats you, even like when you start going to the doctor again, all of those stuff, how your family interacts with you, like everything. Once people find out that characteristic of you, you are treated that whole way. And then that's how you're treated to see the world too, right? Like you are given these glasses now, these recovery glasses that like you have to run everything through this recovery meter and like, is this, gonna hurt my sobriety type thing? Like literally everything. I mean, like you're literally on defense for the rest of your life, trying to deflect your disease. Like you are just walking through life, making sure that you have this defense built up. Like, I don't think that is healthy. I think the healthy thing is to teach people how, like, whatever's going on with whatever's creating this chaotic relationship with substances, let's figure it out, because it's not that you have this disease and that you're just this way. But so many people, that's what we're taught. That's what the disease model is all about, and it's super unhealthy. And if you tell a young person that, and then they build their whole young identity, I mean, that was me, my 20s, like my whole identity was about me being a heroin addict, like that was who I was. So it's super unhealthy.
Yeah, it's very neurotic actually when you paint it that way, when you're like your whole life you're looking around, is this and speaking of like what I was saying, I'm a very OCD, like my brain is that way. That is a very like neurotic OCD type of thing, like constantly thinking about like what's going to get in the way of the disease. And it reminds me, I feel like as human beings we like structure and we like control. I feel like human beings really like control. And I could be speaking out of my ass here, but I would imagine addicts in particularly really want some type of control, or people who struggle with addiction. I guess we're trying to break away from that language here. So people who have addictive tendencies or struggle with addiction, they probably like to feel like something's in control. So like, for example, there's been times in my life where I got addicted to fitness, and all of a sudden fitness was like, oh my God, I figured it out. If I just get into fitness, everything will be okay. The blessings will come. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm like going to do my fitness routine every day, and then you get an injury, and then you're like, oh my God, I got an injury. Now what? And it's like, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that it's like letting go of control and understanding that, trying to phrase this, like what I was trying to explain earlier in the podcast, that some of the best advice I got was that the blessings might not come, that there is going to be chaos on the way. And it's nice to have some structure, but understand that you're never going to find all the answers or the perfect path in life to keep things perfect. Things are going to break down and you have to constantly put them back together. So yeah, I don't think that's healthy for people in the 12-step program to be clinging onto it for dear life. Like, if I follow these rules, everything's going to be okay. I'll never get injured. Nothing bad will ever happen again, So
Yeah.
okay, so I have one more thing that I wrote here, and then I'm going to ask you if I missed anything that you wanted to touch on. But this one, I don't know if this is for me personally, or if other people feel this as well, or if you feel this as well. I thought there was a very unrealistic time expectation, like meaning they wanted so much of your time in the program. Like for me, I remember when I started going into that program, I was going through a financial crisis and I had to work more hours. And they were like, you need to do a meeting every day first. And I'm like, I can't. I'm like, I physically can't. Right now, some of my biggest challenges are that I'm not making enough money to survive. I was in a difficult relationship, and either I would stay with him and be in this toxic relationship, or I would figure out a solution to get out of that relationship, to get into a mentally healthy environment. And the best thing I could do was to work. And I was getting reamed, my ass was getting reamed by my sponsor. You're not really doing the program. You're not really committing to the program if you're not going every day for 30 days. And I was like, I physically can't. I can't pray money my way. I can't just pray for money to come my way. I have to work. And I found that I almost would have stayed in the program if they didn't say stuff like that. If they weren't like, you got to come every day. You got I don't know if you have any experience with that. Did you think that the time demands were too heavy, or what they expected of you in those kind of ways?
Yeah, I mean, if you are, I think one sort of important differentiator, I can't say that word, differentiator that we should also bring up is that there's kind of two different, well, there's several different, but there's kind of two different type of AA, right? There's the meetings where you literally go, and the only time you hear the literature is when they read the preamble in the beginning, and then it's basically people raise their hand and share, and there's no talk about the literature or working with others or anything like that, right? Then you have the super intense, like all about the first 164 pages, and that was the type that I was involved in, because it's the first I was exposed to, and I was told that's the real program and that's the real 12-step. So that is what I dove into. And especially, I feel like the more on the radar that your program is to like hardcore, the more time is taken, absolutely, because there's more of carrying the message, there's more of doing step work with others, there's just more meeting time to find new sponsees. Like, it's all about helping others and giving back and doing all of the things. So absolutely, when I was in the program, a whole lot of my time was expected and given to that. I was part of carrying the message to detoxes and a couple of programs when I was in Dallas, and that took up a hell of a lot of my time. But it's every time that I would go back out and I would come back, I'm like, what else can I add to, keep this disease away, to work to, show them I'm serious, to really get to it. So that's how I ended up giving like a shit ton of my time to the program, was because every time I would come back, I would like pile on a new commitment to like, I'm really serious, guys. Like, I really want to do this. Like, because when you become the revolving door, people start looking down on you, and people are like, oh, like, she's not serious, like, be careful of her, she'll bring you down before you bring her up type vibe. And so yeah, you've heard that before, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think the time commitments, it's asking for too much from people. I mean, I guess their counter argument, because I've challenged this with sponsors before, and their counter argument was that you have to keep yourself distracted. Like, you have to, any time away from being pulled in towards addiction is time well spent. So I guess I can understand that. But where it was also problematic for me personally was, I'm a musician. So one of the most sobering things I could do is play my instrument. And I've heard of people in the program talking about how they've stopped doing some of their passions and they put their all in the program. And to me, that's like all my spidey senses go up. Like, talk about trusting your intuition. I'm like, no, like look, I have a piano, like I love what I do. Like, I have a piano painting back there for a reason, because it's like kind of the center of my world. I'd rather get addicted to that than the program. And it does keep me in a healthy, it keeps me in a tranquil, meditative place when I am playing piano. But the time demands that were expected gave me, like I said, I had to work. It would have given me no time to play piano. So and I'm sure a lot of people who did the program can speak for this. I was lying to my sponsor, and I was telling her that I was going to daily meetings, and I wasn't. I was going like twice a week, but because they were virtual meetings, so I could get away with it. It sounds like in your situation, it was like a little more cliquey because it was in person. I could kind of get away with stuff because I was like, I'll just tell her I'm going daily. And funny, at the end of the 12 steps, she was like, you're my best sponsee. You're my best sponsee. And in my head, I'm like, I didn't follow any of the rules. Like, I'm doing well because I didn't follow any of the rules, which is kind of ironic, but I didn't tell her that. Okay, so that's my list of like some of my main points. Is there anything there that I left out that you feel like we should touch on this before the end of the episode, you know?
Gosh, I mean, there's so much, but you did say one thing in the beginning that I just wanted to say, and I think it's a lot of people when they struggle if with should they talk about it, right? And the whole idea of, if I talk about it, am I going to prevent somebody from going? Am I going to make somebody not go, right? And it's one of those things that it's like, if we stay silent about all of the harm that happens, because yes, it does help some people, right? But statistically, when we look at how many people find success in the rooms, it's not very big, right? So the likelihood of people experiencing the harm in one degree or another, because I mean, it can go all the way to SA, to just, and I want to say to just emotional abuse, but I mean, there's a huge array of harm that can happen in those spaces.
Yeah.
We are allowed to talk about the other side, and we aren't doing people who are entering those spaces we're not doing them any favors by staying silent, right? Because then they go in these spaces and they've only seen and heard the positive. So then remember, when you thought maybe it was just you, I thought maybe it was just me. So many people sit there and suffer because the rooms also tell them that it is just them, that it's a them problem, and they need to figure it out because the program works if they work it. So they need to figure out what they're doing that's not working, right?
Yeah.
And I just think it's so, like, the program has gotten away with so much for so long because of that. Because people have felt that they shouldn't say anything because they could prevent somebody from going. Good. Right. Honestly, if I prevent somebody from going, I don't think I have that much the push that somebody's going to get when it comes to looking for help. All of the signs are going to be telling them to go to a meeting. All of the resources are going to be telling them to go to a meeting. So if they hear one or two voices saying something different, at least now they have it in the back of their head. So when they start to see things, they're aware and not thinking it's just them, because you never heard, I'm assuming you probably in those spaces never heard any of the red flags. Like, all of the red flags were, some are sicker than others. Like, it was always a slogan to dismiss whatever bullshit was going on,
Yeah. The slogans. Yeah. The slogans were a big one for me. I couldn't stand and maybe this is just me being like petty, but I couldn't stand the, if you work it, you're worth it. Do you remember that one? At the end? Yeah. I was like, can we not, like, it was like kind of childish, but that was like another big one for me. Was the slogans made me feel like I was this like robot. Like, I was like, are we human? Like, it kind of felt like, remember Toy Story, and they had that Woody that you just like pulled a string, and he said, it just seemed like these people become like, you pull the string and they just say,
there's
take each day at a time. Boots. Like, there's like a slogan, like they just had a slogan, like they were no longer human anymore. Like, they were just being programmed. And then I've heard this counter argument as well, but you need to be deprogram. You need to be programmed differently because the way you were programmed before was wrong. I've heard that as well. So there's always like a counter argument for every criticism, which goes back to what we were saying in the beginning, that this is very it's a dangerous program in terms of learning to trust your own intuition and to think independently, which I don't think is okay, and I feel you've made me feel better about talking about it. I was scared. I was like, what if I kill what if me talking about it kills somebody? Like, what if someone's in the program and they drop out because I mentioned it? But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it could do more net good to have these discussions,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so before we end, and I'm sure you're going to challenge me on this one, but I did want to talk about any potential good that comes from the program. So we already touched on acts of service, and you brought up your points why that could also be harmful in certain contexts. One thing that I thought was helpful for me, and feel free to challenge me if you're like, actually, no, these are the reasons why I don't agree with you, but we'll see. I actually thought it was helpful for me to let go of resentments. I personally felt that I was somebody who held on to the past too much, and by kind of that was something, I think it was in step 4, they talk about letting go of resentments. It's either 4 or 6, I can't remember.
4, you write them all out.
4, yeah. And I can already argue with myself here where it's like, well, in some cases forgiveness isn't always possible. But I do, as a general everyday thing, I do find it easier just to be like, I don't want to be mad at that person honking their horn at me, like whatever bullshit's going around. I do find it easier to forgive and let go of resentments. Do you agree with that is a helpful tool in the program, or do you have any criticisms about that?
I mean, if we're talking about this specific thing, do I think that it has the potential, can it be good? Sure. Can it also be harmful? Absolutely. Right. Because there are some people who have had to look at their part when it comes to SA, even if it's just about, the fact that they still think about it, and, having to, I've heard horror stories of people having to make amends to people who abuse them. Like there are certain things that can come from that are really bad, but everybody's different. Can that be a possible tool that helps somebody? Who am I to say it's not? I know what the harmful side of it was. I do think that there was a time that being able to, especially, in my early 20s, when you're kind of in me world, it was helpful for me to see the other side in certain things. Did it need to be like a daily tool where every single thing that came up that I needed to find my part? Like sometimes people just suck, and sometimes, you are just looking at something a little bit. And so I can't give a blanket answer that it's all the way bad. I do think that there are some people that will find some benefit, but I do think it can be really harmful too. It's not black and white.
I do think it helped me because you said everybody's different. I think it helped me because I leaned too far in the other direction of holding resentment towards everybody. But to also agree with you, it shouldn't be applied to every situation, because then I would find myself like on the train, for example, and there'd be I live in Philly, so all kinds of stuff happens on the train here. There'd be people smoking cigarettes in my face on the train, and I'm doing step 4 at the moment. In my head, I'm like, oh, let go, just let go of resentment. And I'm just like, no, there's a reality that I'm annoyed right now, and this guy is being an asshole by smoking a cigarette on the train in my face. But in my head, I'm just like, oh, but let it all go. It's like, no, some anger is appropriate. Without somebody getting angry at that guy, there would just be total chaos. You know what I mean? Now, obviously, there's not enough money on the Philly trains to monitor the trains, so that's a different story. But just in general in life, anger does serve a purpose. So in the context of, hey, there's an appropriate time for anger, we need this anger in this situation to get change, then step 4 would probably not be useful for, or not step 4, but the resentment portion of step 4 would probably not be useful for somebody, for example, who is afraid to speak up to their family. For somebody who has maybe a narcissistic husband or parents or something like that, where they're having trouble standing up for themselves. That might not be a useful tool. For me, I kind of was going in the other direction. But yeah, I agree with you there that it's really all context and individual based, and because it's context and individual based, it shouldn't be treated as a one rule, let go of resentments in all circumstances,
Right. because then you don't learn how to manage your emotions. You learn to have no
Yeah.
emotions. You basically become, I forget the line in the book, but basically it says like we aren't allowed to have anger. That's like the luxury of dubious or whatever the heck it says in there. But it's you learn to just like, yeah, like just see the good in everything and just look at your, well, why are you annoyed? Like they deserve to be on this train just as much as you are. Like all of that freaking weird stuff. It's not a healthy way to go about life, right? Like it's
Yeah.
just not. But am I going to say that that is a tool that never works for anyone at no point in their life? No, of course not. I think in these spaces, it's way too all or nothing. We talk about stuff like way too black and white when like there's a
Right.
lot in the gray. There's a hell of a lot in the gray that just completely gets overlooked.
And I think to kind of cap off like our complaints about the 12-step program, I think that's ultimately what made me leave. I did see some value in the program. Like I said, I benefited from letting go of resentments, but it felt like the people in the program were so strict that they wouldn't let me have like yeah, but you got to do it this way and this way and this
Yeah.
way. And they do, to their credit, they do sometimes say, take what works and leave the rest. I have heard that in my meeting, but they don't always behave that way. They say that, but they don't always behave, do what works and leave the rest. If they were able to do what works and leave the rest seriously and they were able to stick to that, I think it could be a far more beneficial program. But they don't really, I didn't feel like it was an environment that allowed for proper discernment of what worked for me versus what works for you. It was more
Right.
of a, let's do that, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have one more question for you today to cap things off. Now that we've discussed, our complaints about the older methods of recovery, I know you're very passionate about progressing things forward. What are some tools or things that have helped you or that have helped other people that, let's say somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, I have been thinking about leaving the program, but I don't want to just be left with nothing. Where do I go next? Do you have any guidance or advice like that?
I really think it just depends where you're at on your journey, right? Like, if you are someone who is still fighting through, like cravings and such, then you probably definitely need to find some sort of alternative path of, working on those things. And for some people, it's just as simple as leaving. It's just as simple as leaving. And for some people, sometimes they say like their time, all of a sudden their time opens up because now they're not
Right.
doing a bunch of service commitments and going to meetings. Um, and I think a lot of times too, we think like, what are we going to do for our recovery? Maybe you can fill your time with something that has absolutely nothing to do with recovery and just find a hobby that inspires you and wakes you up and makes you feel alive again. But all of when you leave the program, it's going to just depend what you do next, like where you're at in that
Yeah.
process. Like if you're in the very beginning of recovery and you're like, I've already tried this program a bunch of times and I know it's not for me, that's going to be different advice than someone who's been there for years, has been, is very confident in their sobriety or whatever they want to do. So the good thing is that there are different pathways of recovery. And personally, I feel like even other pathways can be a little culty vibe, right? Like, and still kind of push the disease model just in a different format. So, I just say experiment. There are resources out there. I think it just really is going to depend on you. I do have a list of I can send it to you if you want. It's like a list of 12-step alternatives. It's nothing that I necessarily recommend, but I know some people feel like they do need something, right? Like they
Mhm.
need to replace something for their recovery. But I think the best thing that you can do is work on yourself. And like if you have the luxury of being able to work with a therapist, I think really being able to find out what actually is my issue, because I promise you it's not a spiritual malady. So if you can try and pinpoint, because once you get that like figured out, the rest, like I don't think about shooting dope. I don't not think about shooting dope. Like it's just not a thing, right? Like I have
Yeah.
truly can confidently say, and I used to be so scared to say this because you can never be too confident. Like when they teach you,
Yeah.
I can 100% promise you that if I was to start shooting dope again, it would be a conscious decision to pick up again. And it would be a whole new habit that may or may not develop. It wouldn't be some picking up of my disease, picking up where it left off, and all of that shit. So my personal advice would be just to get with the, I guess, yeah, to, if you can, get with a therapist and figure out the reason why you're going to AA, right? Like, what is it that you're trying to fix? Because again, it's not a spiritual malady. And once you figure that out, the freedom that you have, it's fucking fabulous. Like, to really thoroughly, to have thought for so long you're going to have this lifelong disease, and that you have this disease, and that it's always going to be there, and like no matter how much you build your life up, it could always pop out of the closet and get you. To no longer have that thought and just be able to live my life, I cannot tell you how amazing that is, you know?
Yeah.
So that, yeah.
Yeah, well, you seem, I mean, I don't know you before, but you seem to be doing awesome now. I really enjoy your podcast, and you look
Thank
very
you.
healthy, and you're, I like your Christmas tree vibe going on there with your podcast studio. Okay, so that wraps up the podcast today. I'm going to drop a link to Tara Grace's Instagram below, and her YouTube channel if anybody wants to listen to more of her. Is there anything you want to tell them in terms of where they should find you, or plug anything like that before we leave?
Sure. Yeah, you can always find my links at burnthestigma.com. And then my podcast, you can typically, it's such a long name. It's Burn the Stigma's Recovery Rebellion. I know it's like way too long. But so I think you can find it just by searching Burn the Stigma. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and having these conversations, because I know they can be uncomfortable, especially like your first time really getting into it. So good for you for doing it.
It was hard for me because, like you said, you've been doing this for a while now. You've been talking about this for a while. For me, I felt like I was like stopping my sentences. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't, because I remember another thing they said in the program was like, keep everything quiet. Like what did they say at the end? They say, don't tell any, like, I can't remember how they phrase it exactly, but they drill it in your head after every meeting. This is confidential. Don't say it. So like halfway through, I'm like, oh my God, should I share this? Should I share that? Am I killing somebody? Like, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
You know? And it sounds like you've already like worked through a lot of that. So, but for me, I kind of felt like I was like, how do I be politically correct about talking about this? What's the right words to say? And it was, so for the listeners, I apologize. It was hard for me to talk about this because I didn't know like what was appropriate to say or not, but I hope we at least got the message across, and she can talk about this much more eloquently on her podcast. I definitely recommend giving her a listen. And that's it. Pranzata Podcast, episode 159. Have a good day, guys. Bye.